Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello, we are having the lectures on soft skills, and in the course named soft skills, presently we are dealing with communication skills. Till now we have talked a lot about the various forms of communication and then how we can make a communication effective. Today we are going to talk about whether we communicate only with words, since most of us are under the impression that when we communicate, we express, and we express with the help of words. But then, have you ever thought of the fact that we do not communicate only with the help of words? We also communicate at times without words. Say for example, if you meet a person who is not able to use words, does he not communicate? You will find he communicates. The other day I met a beggar who actually with his bowels was looking at me with an expectation that I should drop a coin or two in the bowl, and when I dropped it, I could see a sort of radiance on his face. It was only later that I realized that he was not able to speak. The people around also told me that he was dumb. But then the expressions that were on his face, the expressions of happiness, of satisfaction, that conveyed a lot about the fact that people communicate not only with words, they also communicate without words. When we communicate without words, we actually use some symbols, and there are several cues through which we communicate. These are actually called non-verbal cues. So, non-verbal cues help a lot in verbal cues. It is very important to point it out here that communication is verbal and non-verbal. To make it clear, a verbal communication is a communication which is used with the help of words, but a non-verbal communication is a communication that is done or performed without words. So, today we are going to talk about non-verbal communication and how important are the non-verbal cues in non-verbal communication. Let us look at what psychologists and anthropologists believe. 35% of our communication is verbal, and the remaining 65% are non-verbal. You will actually be surprised to know that one of the famous psychologists and anthropologists, Ray Birdwhishell, has this observation. At the same time, another anthropologist, Mehrabian, says, he moves further one step ahead and says it is only 7% that is verbal, 38% is vocal, and the remaining is non-verbal, meaning thereby non-verbal cues have a very important role to play in the completion of a communicative purpose. Now, what is non-verbal communication? Every day or the other, every passing day we come across various people, various things. All of them we are not in contact with, we are also not in communication with, but then we could realize that all of them communicate. When we communicate without words, we actually take the help of non-verbal cues. These non-verbal cues may be in the form of symbols. We are living in an age today where you find when you are communicating with the help of certain media, say for example, when you are using computers, when you are chatting, when you are making a communication with the help of electronic mail, there are several symbols that are being used. Many people have derived and have discovered that their icons communicate more than their words, and that is why several symbols on your computers, they come to your use, they come to your aid when you are chatting or communicating. So, when you communicate through non-verbal symbols, these symbols can be numberless. It is very difficult to calculate or to have an estimation of all these non-verbal cues, because one study says that there are more than 6 lakh non-verbal cues. It is very difficult to remember all of them, but what we can do is we can categorize them. Whenever you are having a sort of conversation, or you are having a group discussion, or you are having an interview, or you are going to make a public speech or a presentation, you will find that all that you have prepared does not become successful or does not convey the complete idea unless and until they are supplemented and complemented by the non-verbal cues. Now, what are these non-verbal cues and how important are they, that we will see. Non-verbal cues or non-verbal cannot be a substitute to a verbal communication. When you use a word, of course, no non-verbal cue or no non-verbal symbol can be a substitute to a verbal one. For example, you use a word like silence, you use a word like happiness, that cannot be substituted, but at the same time when you use the word happiness, you find that a sort of reaction, a sort of expression, a sort of emotion suddenly comes, spontaneously appears on your face, and people are under the impression that you are happy. So, this is actually the impact of non-verbal communication. A non-verbal communication has got more impact since it is spontaneous. Now, the question is, can we really have a sort of artificial communication? Can we really pose in order to become happy? Can we really also pose in order to become sad, angry, sentimental, or whatever it is? Of course, actors are well trained to do that, but then those sort of feelings which are conveyed through a posed one, they actually become stereotyped. You can recognize, no doubt, those expressions, but when you are going to have a sort of, or when you are going to come across a non-verbal communication for which you are not prepared, which is a spontaneous, it at times becomes very difficult to understand. In a professional world of today, while communication has become the hallmark of all sorts of business dealings, it has become very pertinent to understand the implications of non-verbal cues in order to meet a business deal, in order to have a business transaction, in order to understand people. Now, how important is non-verbal communication? You will realize that whenever you become angry, you actually do not tend to become angry. You actually do not decide to become angry. Or Say for example, when a person is sad, he does not decide to be sad. Of course, from the inside he is sad, and that is why it appears, it resurfaces on his face. So, all sorts of non-verbal communication, they are unintentional. Now, when we say they are unintentional, we also have to realize that we do not pose to create a sort of feeling unless and until it is for a purpose. Of course, we are not as trained as actors, we are not as prepared as those trained people who express the feelings, all sorts of feelings for example, but then when we are under the impression or when we are in a state of sorrow, anger, happiness, sadness or whatsoever, they appear on the face. That is why we say a non-verbal communication is unstructured, it is spontaneous. But then it supplements a verbal communication. A person is sad, so that is reflected not only on his face, but the way he speaks, the way he chooses words, the way he conveys a message, and his message later is actually complemented or supplemented by the feelings that are aroused on his face in many ways than one. Non-verbal messages or non-verbal communication actually work at two levels. The first is the verbal level, that is word, and the second is the non-verbal level. Now, when you in a business world of today come across several people, in order to have certain dealings, you find that it becomes very imperative to have a sort of concentration on the non-verbal messages that are written on the business partner's face or that are there on as well as in a meeting, as well as in a business setting or moreover in organizations. Humans, as we all know, they actually have a sort of nature, and this nature does not change much. We have already talked about attitudes, we have also talked about feelings in previous lectures. Today we will see how certain non-verbal messages appear and how a particular care becomes very important in order to read those non-verbal messages. Most of you, while you are participating in a conference or you are participating in an interview or in a group discussion, you will find that all those people sitting, they are always alive. There is not a single moment of time when they are not communicating, they are communicating throughout. So, when they are communicating throughout and while you are having a discussion, you ought to understand their feelings. As I said earlier, that these non-verbal cues, which are 6 lakhs in number, it is very difficult to have a mention of all of them. But then if we can categorize them, it will make our task very easier. So, let us come to know about the types of non-verbal communication and how they are different and how we can make them distinct in order to have a successful business deal or in order to have a successful enterprise or an endeavor. The first in the category is kinesics. This kinesics refers to body language. One author has gone to the extent of saying that when we communicate, we are actually using 3 languages. The first is a sign language, and the sign language is a sort of stereotype, the posed behavior as we said. Then there is another category which is action language, the way your body behaves. You might have heard many people saying today about the body language. Does our body have a language? Of course. All of us have to realize that our bodies, they actually convey a sort of language. And whether you are present or absent in a meeting, mentally, as I am saying, that is reflected on your face. So, and the third one and more important is the object language, the way a person makes his bearing. Now, in the types of nonverbal communication, the first and the foremost is kinesics. The second is proxemics, which actually deals with space distancing, which the word proxemics comes from the word proximity or closeness. We shall have a detailed discussion on it because it has become very important. We are living in a multicultural world, organizations are multicultural, and then since it is a global world, we have to understand how people behave and how people maintain distances and how their distances matter in terms of communication. Then comes chronemics, where we will talk about the importance of time. Then there is paralanguage, which is also very important. Then we have haptics. Here paralanguage is something that is beyond language. We talk about language, of course. When you talk about language, we talk about words, we talk about how words are spoken, but even a word is a word, but then how this word is spoken, what are the further connotations involved in a word, that we shall study when we talk about paralanguage. Then comes haptics, which is related to touch. You will find that touch has also become a very important part of communication today, since you never know whose touch will generate what sort of feeling and how people feel when they are touched. And then we will also talk about meta communication, where we shall discuss the various features of communication where there is something more than words, where there are several ways, as we have talked about the object language. So, first of all, let us come to discuss kinesics. The word kinesics is related to the movements of the body. Have you ever realized or have you ever experienced that when you are listening to a talk, does a person's body move, or does a person's body give certain signals? Of course, you might not have taken that much of care, but after this lecture you will really find, and you will get more meanings when you make a proper observation of the body movements of a particular person. You know, most of the dealings that we initiate or that we complete is actually the result not only of the verbal communication or the words that the person speaks, rather sometimes it so happens that a person speaks something, but at the same time he means something. Imagine a person calling you, imagine a person telling you something, but he looks in a different direction. I think most of you will feel insulted. You will also find that when you are being called, how you are being called is very important. You know, since the world has different cultures, you find that several gestures which you will come across, one gesture may have one meaning in one culture, but at the same time it may have a different meaning in other culture. If by making a gesture of come here, the gesture of come here in US may mean go there in Italy. So, such is actually the difference when it comes to the kinesics or when it comes to the movement of the body. Now, here it is very important to make a note of what the famous philosopher Sigmund Freud says. You will find when a person speaks, it is not only the words that he speaks, but then it is very important that the person or the speaker or the sender should look at his audience. Now, there are many times when you will find that a person has worked well, he has made a beautiful content of his lecture or speech, but at the same time there are no reactions, there are no movements, and you will find the talk becomes dull, boring. Now, here it is quite pertinent to remember what G.K. Chesterton says about topics. Some people often find that topics are uninteresting, but Chesterton says there are no uninteresting topics, there are uninteresting people. So, it is up to the people or the person or the speaker or the sender to make his talk more important. The way he carries out, the way he performs his speech or his presentation. So, what Freud says is, he who has eyes to see and ears to hear can convince that no mortal can keep a secret. The meaning is that people who are having eyes and ears, they can well assure that we cannot keep a secret. It is crystal clear that our bodies speak, our bodies behave, our bodies communicate, our bodies convey. It is also very significant to add that the meaning of all our speech, the meaning of all our language lies in eyes, lies in ears, lies in smiles, lies in whispers, lies in the degree of the loudness or the pitch level that you do, and that is that becomes apparent on your face. So, if his lips are silent, suppose a person is silent, he does not speak, he does not use a word, that does not mean he is not communicating. So, if his lips are silent, he chats with his fingertips. You will often find that while you are listening to a beautiful song, even though you are not communicating or speaking, suddenly there is a movement in your fingers, in your heads, in your muscles, in your jaws, in all parts of your body. So, what does that convey? It conveys that even when you are silent, you are communicating. If his lips are silent, he chats with his fingertips, betrayal oozes out of him at every pore. Say for example, if you go to deliver a talk, or if you go to become a participant in a meeting or whatsoever, even though you may not say anything, you may be silent, but at the same time your silence has a meaning. We shall discuss at length how silence has a meaning, how silence can be interpreted differently, and that also in different cultures. Now, what actually are the forms of kinesics? By kinesics, of course, we mean the body language. Our body speaks, our body behaves. But then what is so important in the body? Which parts of the body they communicate or they speak? The first is facial expression or facial appearance, then personal appearance, then facial expressions, then eye contact, then posture, and then gesture. All these comprise kinesics. Now, one question that might crop up in your mind is, does our personal appearance has any bearing on the way we communicate? Of course. You know, when you go to listen to a talk by an eminent person whose name only you know, but you have not seen, what is it that you do? You actually start making an impression of the person. Before the person arrives, you actually think a lot about that person, how the person will be, what sort of face will he have, how long or tall or short or what so, and then when the person appears, then you start looking at him and then you try to connect his emotions, because all our faces, they are actually, it is a junction of emotions. When you talk about personal appearance, it is not that all of us have to be beautiful, but at the same time we have to see that our face is actually a platform or a junction of emotions. Several emotions in the form of happiness, sorrow, dejection, despair, tears, anger, sympathy, empathy, all these emotions are well written over our face. Now the question is, when you are communicating, of course you need to understand, even if you are a receiver, you will actually try to draw or try to extract so many meanings from the facial expression of the other person. You will get plenty of opportunities when you have to speak. Will you really take a lot of care on how to have a personal bearing, how to make yourself groomed, how to make yourself appear dignified for an occasion? Of course. But at the same time, you should also realize that even though we say face is the index of the mind, because what is happening within can appear on the face. But does that hold true every now and then? No. There is another line which says that a false face must have a false heart within. This is in the case of when you are manipulating. So you not only manipulate your words, you also manipulate your expressions. At least your facial expressions you manipulate. And then, but then it is not possible for everyone. Majority of people, they cannot hide, as Freud says, they cannot hide their body language. If they are lying, that is written on the face. You will come across several situations where, take for example a small child. When the child starts lying, what the child usually does is he actually puts his hands in the pocket. Now that is an implication that actually reflects that the child is trying to hide something, and if you look at, you will find that his hands, they are actually tight, they are clamped, and most of the time they are lying. Now same is the case with adults. Even when they are lying, some way or the other this expression is there on their faces, unless and until they are trained like actors. So remember, nowadays it has become very important that in order to meet out certain business transaction and certain dealings, sometimes you manipulate your expressions, and on other occasions you also try, because you have to be flexible, but then it actually requires a lot of practice. So remember, moreover, when we talk about facial expressions, we also have to talk about the sort of dress. Most of us have been listening to the fact that often our teachers usually used to say that your shoes reflect your personality. We have already had a lecture on personality, but then here a point of caution is that the way you dress yourself, the way you groom yourself, the sort of dress that you choose, that actually has a sort of intention. Of course, the expression which is there on your face may not be intentional, but when you choose a dress, that has some way or the other some connection with your mindset, which dress to choose for. And that is why you will find when a person goes to deliver a talk, he assures that he is well dressed. When we say well dressed, what actually we mean is not only in terms of color, but also in terms of how particular care has been taken to see that your dress is properly washed and properly ironed. Not that it should be very expensive, because this gives a lot of impression. As a speaker or even as a listener, you judge your speaker in the very first instance. Maybe at times you may be wrong also, but remember that you create a first impression. So while you are going to create a first impression, or you are going to leave the first impression, that is possible by the sort of dress and by the sort of extra care that you have taken into consideration in order to make yourself look presentable and at the same time pleasant as well. Next is not only the face, but your eyes. Do you communicate with your eyes? Yes. Our eyes reveal a lot of emotions. Most of the emotions are written in the eyes, even a positive message. But if it is delivered with a squint eye, the message tends to become negative. Now, these eyes, they have a language, and that is why we often say that eyes are the mirror. Eyes are the mirror of the heart and the windows of the soul. So, through eyes you communicate a lot, all sorts of emotions, and you know it is very difficult to calculate or to gather or to gaze. Remember, these eyes, eye contact while you are communicating, as I said in the beginning, you want your sender or your speaker to look at you. The vice versa is also true. As a listener, you want that the speaker should look at you, and there is a specific purpose also. When the speaker looks at the crowd, there tends to be a sort of rapport, there tends to be a sort of association, there actually tends to be a sort of friendliness, and this is actually the establishment of a credibility on which the entire talk will depend. That is why eyes are important. But remember, when you are having your eye contact, they are also very culture specific. In many cultures, especially in Asian cultures, you will find, and I am going to also cite an example, that people on many occasions they actually try to avoid eye contact, because eyes, they reveal treachery, they reveal sincerity, they reveal honesty, they reveal your commitment, they reveal your conviction, and hence you are going to win your crowd in the first moment with the help of your eyes. But remember, how you will make an impression through your eyes, that is very important. Through eyes you control your audience. Here you will find all sorts of emotions are there. The eyes reflect fear, anger, surprise, joy, sometimes neutral also, sometimes dismay also, sometimes despair also. So, it is very important that while you are communicating, you ought to be aware of, because as a soft skills trainer, it is going to be my advice that when you are communicating, whether it is a conversation or a group discussion or a public speech, eye contact is very important. Let us look at this observation which Harper Wins and Matarazzo in their book Nonverbal Communication, the State of the Art says. What they say has actually got a lot of implication, and they say Arabs, Latin Americans and Southern Europeans, they gaze on face of their conversational partners. So, when you are talking, they actually gaze on the face of their conversational partners, whereas Asians, Indians, Pakistanis and Northern European people, they tend to show peripheral gaze or no gaze at all. But then in a world of today, it is very important that while you are making an eye contact, you actually need to show that this eye contact neither becomes a gaze nor becomes a stare. Nowadays, there have been cases where and in certain cultures you cannot look beyond the neck of a person. You know, that may appear to be insulting, that may appear to be derogatory. But remember, through eyes we actually create a sort of, or we establish a sort of conviction or a sort of rapport with our audience or with our crowd. Now, it is also very important to note here what has been said by Herodotus: men trust their ears less than their eyes. Remember, but then whatever we see through our eyes, they appear to be true. Sometimes because of the artificiality, because of the sort of acting which some people do or some actors, they can also send a message of deceit or treachery through their eyes. Hence, you are to be very particular when you are communicating, because these eyes give you a sort of feedback both as a speaker, even as a listener. Eyes, as I have said earlier, they reflect your sincerity and they indicate emotion. When you are delivering a talk, you will find that even though you are using words, but sometimes you can also check yourself when people sitting either on the front or on the back benches, they tend to slouch, they tend to give glowering expressions, sometimes or the other, they also tend to look at their wristwatch frequently. These are actually the indicators that your talk is not becoming interesting. At the same time, what you need to do is, you actually take a lesson from their language of the eyes, and you can bring a sort of change in your delivery pattern, as well as in the way you are referring to certain examples, which we shall discuss when we talk about oral presentations. Next is the movement. When we are having a communication, do we really move? Especially in terms of group discussion, you will find people have a particular seat allotted to them. But then there is a tendency among some people that either they move very excessively in their chair, or sometimes they recline so much that it appears quite difficult. It at times may embarrass others. And when you talk about movement, we should also see that people will make a sort of impression the way you are going to move. You are not going to be static. We shall talk about, when you talk about proximus, that when you are talking or when you are giving a public speech, you cannot remain at a particular seat or at a particular position. That may appear to be very distracting. You know, it has to be taken care of that while delivering a talk or while having a conversation, you are aware of the movements that are being done. It is always advisable that you need not rush while you are communicating, while you are delivering a talk. There are several ways people, and depending upon their natures, they vary in the styles of their movement. Some of them move too fast, some of them move too slowly. But remember, you are not going to run, because if you run, if you give a sort of impression that you are running, you are making excessive movements, you are also running with your speech or with your content. Hence, it is advisable that if you are making a move, you should actually make a move which may appear to be very pleasant, which may appear to be very excellent, which may appear to be very graceful. You will find that if you are participating in a conference or in a workshop, when the speaker is called, how the speaker moves. Dale Carnegie in his famous book says, people make impression of how you dress, how you walk, how you sit, and how you stand. So these non-verbal things are very important, and you will find that there are many people, they actually give the impression the way either they go to take their seat or they go to move to their dais. It actually gives an impression of your mindset, whether you are in a hurry, whether you are confident, you are nervous, you actually feel running sort of material or whatsoever. So why should you give an impression that you are not prepared? Remember, nothing is going to fall. Neither the sky will fall nor the earth will crumble. All you need to do is to give a talk, and all you need to see is that your audience throughout is involved, your audience throughout is participating, and that is possible the way you create a rapport, not only by making movements, but by looking at your crowd through your eye behavior, through your hand movements and all. Now, one question that might appear in your mind is posture also important when we are making a conversation or we are giving a talk? Now, what actually is posture? Now, the word posture means positioning, how you position yourself. As I said earlier, some people tend to give the impression by reclining, meaning thereby they are not attentive. You need to be very attentive when you are giving a talk, and you need to see that everyone is taken care of, and by reclining in the chair you actually suggest that either you want to rest or you are not careful, nor do you bother about the sentiments of other people. So, when you are talking or when you are making a speech, where are your arms? How do you keep your arms? Have you put your arms on the lectern, or have you put your arms on your waist, or you are worried about your hands, you are putting them in your pocket, and are your shoulders also reclining? This actually may give the impression to the audience that you are not prepared, you are not here, you are here just for the sake of being here. So, how do you position your arms? You reveal the way you sit, you reveal the way you stand, you reveal the way you move, you reveal the way you look at the people. So, when your turn comes, or if you are sitting, you are actually expressing your alertness. If your name is being called, please be alert to go and take your seat. If you are being introduced by some other person, please, with your eye movements, please express a sense of gratitude, even though it may appear very challenging, but once practiced, because you have to deliver so many talks, you have to deliver so many lectures, you have to participate in several significant meetings, and you have to have several business transactions. That is why it is very important. At times you will feel that many people, as I said, because of the emotions that they carry. But remember, should you carry the emotion of embarrassment which you had faced in the morning? Should you carry the embarrassment of frustration? Should you carry the feeling of depression when you come for an official visit? No. But then some people, because all of us are humans, and we never have a control over our feelings. That is why at times we feel that we clamp our hands. Sometimes many people are in the habit of giving another impression by banding. Sometimes many people play with their key rings. Some people also are not able to tolerate the look of their audience, and they start feeling within that there is something that is actually not present. The moment a look comes from the audience at their dress, they tend to become nervous, and that is why what they do is, in order to overcome, because we have already said that your non-verbal message actually can compensate for the verbal message. So, when you run sort of ideas, what do? You start pussyfooting, you start plodding, you start shuffling, and you also start becoming very belligerent. All these actually create a very negative impression, and even though you have prepared a lot and you have come with a lot of endeavors to make this talk very important and very memorable, that actually tends to become a failure. And then why? Because you had not taken care, too much care of that. And if posture is important, so important are gestures also. What are gestures? Can we really make use of gestures? You will find that when you are talking, whether you want it or not, suddenly your hands start moving, sometimes your fingers starts moving, sometimes your shoulders, your torso, all these. But remember, because the way you are making use of language, it actually requires a sort of backup, and that backup is gesture. How to do that? Suppose you want to raise a question. So when you raise a question or you try to make an advice, what you say, one thing that you should bear in your mind is, but remember, you should never do two things at the same time. So what happens? Suddenly our fingers, they start making movements. But remember, if you start repeating the same gestures, if a person starts thumping the desk time and again, that may actually be taken as a negative way. Hence, what is the wisdom? The wisdom is to complement the movement of your fingers and your limbs and your hands and all when a particular time arises or when a particular need arises. For example, your gestures can be enumerative. You are talking about something where you also want to tell them, and you want your you want your audience to take back something. And how can they take back something unless they remember? They will remember when you make use of your hand gestures or your gestures of finger. One thing, please bear in mind. And there are some gestures which are symbolic, some gestures, a science person, when he is describing an object, what he will do in order to make his things clear, he will actually create the size with the help of his palm and with the help of his fingers. He will make a circle, it is a circular rotation like this. And then sometimes, if you are talking about something which is symbolic, you make a symbolic gesture where there is a subtle suggestion. And you remember what it will do? It will actually enhance and add to the quality of your talk or your speech. Remember, when we are communicating, there are several movements that we do. But then, as I said, in different cultures, they may have a different meaning. But there are some which actually may have a common meaning. It is very important that we know which sort of hand movements have got a particular meaning. For example, when you are having a limping hands, that symbolize boredom. At the same time, when the hands are flat, when in course of the talk you actually make your hands flat, that actually they offer silent questions. Open hands tend to be welcome. You are welcoming somebody and then you give open hands. At the same time, the way you shake hands, they are also symbolical. They also tend to give meanings. But then clenched hands, they symbolize that you are under a state of tension and frustration. Somebody, you will find, you might have been watching several movies and plays and dramas and all. When there is a sort of regret, there is a sort of uncertainty, there is a sort of insecurity, what you do is you start clinging your hands. At the same time, sometimes when you either become very determined, you create a sort of movement through your palm, and that symbolizes, with the help of the fist, you symbolize your determination and all. But then there are certain gestures which are very normal, which are very common. Say for example, crossing the hands, they actually tend to be negative. At the same time, suppose you are sitting and listening to a lecture and your legs are crossed, they actually are also insulting. As a speaker also, if your legs are crossed, it is a sort of insult. So see that even though your message may be very transparent, your content may be very well wrought out, your content may be well drafted, but then if you are doing all these activities which come under non-verbal cues, they are actually going to mar your message, mar the meaning and the efficacy of your message. When people from other cultures meet you or you meet them, the way you shake your hands, I sometimes realize that there was a time when a person, while he was having a handshake, he actually took my hand in his hand for a long time and he kept it shaking. I then realized that perhaps there was something wrong, and then on the other hand, with another person I could find the handshake was so pleasant, the handshake was so warm. So, these emotions which actually are generated the way you make movements, the way you make use of your non-verbal cues. Usually it is said that when a politician shakes a hand, it is called a glove handshake, and sometimes it may also, many people also, in order to give the impression of formality, or they are not willing to have a handshake with you, but then they actually shake your hands, it is called a dead fish handshake. But then all these have intended meanings. So, please be careful of all these meanings, because they are going a long way in your career, either as a professional, as a speaker, as an entrepreneur. You will also find people who are most of the time thoughtful and who are thinking about power, and they start struggling for dominance and all. They are most of the time swaggering or pacing, or sometimes they appear to be very meditative with the talk of the preoccupation that is there in their minds. Friends, it is very important to make a connection between your verbal as well as your non-verbal message in order to complete a proper communication, be it a speech, be it a presentation, be it a conversation. Because after all, meaning, as I have been saying since the beginning in most of my lectures, meaning does not lie simply in words, meaning lies in people. Meaning lies the way people behave, meaning lies the way people cooperate in communication, and the goal of all communication is to create goodwill, is to create a sort of relationship. That is where the world today stands. And whether you are communicating digitally, whether or you are communicating face to face, or you are communicating with the help of electronic mails and all, please beware of the symbols, please beware of the meanings that you are going to convey through these. We communicate not only with words, but we also communicate with the help of non-words, and these non-words go a long way in giving you a meaning and making your listeners understand the implication of your talk. In the next lecture, we will be talking about how you can make use of voice and how you can make use of vocal characteristics. Thank you very much.